clouds of hydrogen then become a galaxy. The galaxy's information rules are such that it will create stars. The star's information rules are such that it will create this stardust. And then stardust creates everything else, including us. It's all digital processing. Absolutely, totally amazing.
Welcome back to Mind Matters, everyone. Today we are joined by Ken Pedersen. Ken is a retired electrical engineer. He has a strong background in information processing, mathematics, and modern physics. And he's the author of two books. The book we're going to be discussing today is Modern Science Proves Intelligent Design, the Information System Worldview. It's a copy of the book right there. So we're going to delve into this book. First, welcome to the show, Ken. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Okay. Pleasure to be here. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So we were just talking before the show on the story of how you kind of got into this. I'd mentioned that I kind of got into these topics about 11 years ago reading a philosophy book, actually, by Thomas Nagel, Mind and Cosmos, on Thomas Nagel, a famous atheist philosopher who, like, is it Anthony Flew that you mentioned in the book? Who became Anthony Flew became a theist, but Thomas Nagel didn't become a theist, but he wrote a book kind of totally dismantling and demolishing the materialistic worldview. So that kind of started me on this path, and then getting into some information theory and in my own mind trying to fit it all together. So could you give a little bit of background or a little bit of information on your background and how you came to the main ideas in this book?
Okay, sure. First of all, I'm a PhD in electrical engineering, which is, for those who don't know, that's 8 years of math and science, basically, throughout the 60s. I got my PhD in like 1970. But as I mentioned to you earlier, I did a lot of reading of philosophy, even in my high school years and in college. So I got a scientific education and background in philosophy. And the philosophy at the time was all scientific materialism. The popular philosophy they taught in college and taught in just about everywhere is that the universe is an accident. It's a meaningless accident, and it's a meaningless materialistic accident. And that is the foundation of atheism. So when I came out of college, I was a solid atheist. I was absolutely committed, and I stayed that way for 25 years until I realized, and it came to a slow realization, probably similar to something you've been going through, that science itself had proven that they had discovered the structure of the universe. So they discovered the structure of quantum mechanics. They discovered the structure of the cell, and they discovered the structure of neurons in the brain. And all these things were digital processing systems. And the beauty and the complexity of all this was way beyond anything that could possibly be an accident. And that's not just a feeling, that's a mathematical fact. You go look at the DNA program, it's 3.2 billion instructions, which is equivalent to 6.2 billion digital instructions. And there is no way in the world that could accidentally happen. The probability of even finding proteins in your body is like you winning the Powerball lottery 70 million times in a row. Mm-hmm. The math doesn't support an accidental universe at all. It just could not possibly happen. This realization came to me in my late 40s, and unfortunately, I'd raised 3 daughters and telling them I was an atheist, and they should be too. So then, as penance, I wrote the first book, which was Ginny's Universe, that explained the design of the universe that the science had found in my lifetime. In the 70 years of I'm actually 76, but in 70 years, science had found the design of the universe. I mean, there's a lot of things we don't know. We don't know what energy is, or what life is, or what consciousness is, but we know the design of the universe. Mm-hmm. And it was way too complex, and it was way too beautiful, and it's curiously enough, it had nothing to do with matter. It's all mm-hmm. information and energy, all of it, all the way through, layers and layers of information processing. So anyway, make a long story endless here, I guess. I was an atheist, and I slowly realized I was wrong. I wrote the first book for my daughters, never intended to publish it. A friend of mine who had published books read it and sent it to his agent. And then 3 weeks later, I had 3 offers to publish the book, which was kind of amazing. And it got published in England by O Books, and it got published in Germany and in Poland, which I thought was pretty good for it. I actually wrote a notebook to explain to my daughters why I had converted from atheism to intelligent design. That's my background. I retired from Raytheon. I was in charge of their advanced programs laboratory, which was a research and development laboratory. I had 800 people working for me for the last 15 years of my career. We did all the tactical missiles, well, 95% of the tactical missiles for this country, and it came out of my lab. And so my background is really system engineering. People hear electrical engineering, they think I fix TVs or something. That's not true at all. I'm a system engineer who works with technology to put together systems. And we worked on the most exotic systems in the world, and it was a really exciting career.
Yeah, you describe in your book just a bit of that background and how it plays into the ideas in your book, and just all the different technologies that have been developed over the past several decades, like you mentioned, and you were at the researching and developing the top of the line systems in radar and like imaging and just pretty much anything you can imagine you were working on. So you've got this electrical engineering, systems engineering background where you see the construction and the function of information processing systems. So I think that background allowed you to see the corollaries in the natural world and in the mind too. So in the book,
I think you're exactly, because I'm going to amplify that point. I think that's exactly right. In my job, I had lots of engineers and scientists working for me, a lot of PhDs in science, physics especially, working for me. And a system engineering is almost the reverse of a scientist. A scientist gets specialized in one particular area and drills that down deep, deep, deep. And we have to make progress in that area. But it's a different worldview. It's a different perspective on life. System engineers, I never designed a board, but I designed systems. You go out there and look at the technology and put systems together. So one person is looking at it from a reductionist standpoint, trying to find the very most elemental pieces of that science. And the other person is looking at it from more of an emergent standpoint of how can you build a system with it. Mm-hmm. It's a very different perspective. And it is, people don't understand that, but it's a very different perspective. That's not to say there aren't generalist scientists. There are, but I mean, there is a different perspective between the scientific method and system engineering. And you captured it very well just there. That's very impressive. Thank you.
Well, something that I find so interesting is that we've been looking at another book called Evolution 2.0 by Perry Marshall, who is also...
I've read it. I've read that book, yes.
So he's also an electrical engineer, as you know. That's his background. And while there's
a theme here, isn't there?
There certainly is. And speaks so much to what you're saying about having this kind of step back, whole systems point of view, where you can use your knowledge of the technology that you've worked on to apply that to how much larger things could work. Now, the thing is, while he focuses mainly on the discoveries in biology, DNA and cells and those subjects, you take an even broader view, Ken. And what I so appreciated about your book was how you apply this to the macro, to galaxies. At one point you say, galaxies are gigantic information processing systems. And I'd never read that before, but it was always a question in the back of my mind. Because if ID is valid for biological entities, then why wouldn't it also apply to much larger systems of information? So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how galaxies are these gigantic information processing systems.
Let me start a little before galaxies for you, okay? The thing that really convinced me, the thing that really just blew my mind when I finally realized it, was that the physicists had discovered quantum mechanics. And they discovered three essential quantum fields: the electron, the up quark, and the down quark. I'll get there, believe me. But the thing that blows your mind is there's no matter there. It's just energy. There's nothing material there. It's energy and information. And the incredibly beautiful thing is this digital information. The electron has about 5 variables, and they're all digital: charge and spin and so forth and so on. And so the up and down quark are the same. They have different variables. They have a charge, but they have other things. I'm not going to go into physics. But my point is, it is a digital information processing system. Now, here you got these little tiny clouds, and they are tiny, that have digital information, and they communicate with each other just like logic circuits in a computer. and they change their information state. And by doing this, they make protons and neutrons, the quarks do, and then they make atoms, and atoms are actually little digital computers. All an atom does is monitor the state of its electron in its outer shell. And that state can only be in very specific values. And that means it's a digitally quantized information processing system. So these atoms monitor that state, and they exchange information with other atoms and with radiant energy. So the interaction of atoms is a digital processing system. And then then some atoms can share electron, and then you get molecules. So the molecules are arrays of digital processing systems and of atoms. So the entire world of quarks and atoms and molecules are made by 3 layers of digital process. Very beautiful, very exact, very precise, very sophisticated, unbelievably complex digital processing systems. Mm-hmm. Now, what do they make? Well, the first thing they make is galaxies. And so when you get a cloud of hydrogen and helium, the laws of gravity are such that a galaxy is made. Now, why do you have to make a galaxy? Well, if you're thinking about why you got to make a galaxy, you're going to design a universe. Hydrogen and helium are never going to do you any damn good at all. They're just little tiny atoms. You've got to get to bigger atoms to make things like us. The only way to get to bigger atoms is to smash them together in a fusion engine that's controlled by gravity. The purpose of galaxies is to create stars. I mean, that should be obvious. Galaxies are made out of stars. The purpose of stars is to smash helium and hydrogen together to make all the atoms that we live in reality. And we got 92 stable elements and another 18 or 20 unstable elements they found. But you had to have stars to smash all this information together into this form. And once you get that form, those atomic elements are an alphabet that you can build molecules with. Anyway, so the beauty of the galaxies and the stars is they are absolutely necessary steps to get from quarks and atoms to stardust and planets. And they process the information. They actually, if you look at it from layers of processing, you get the quarks, and you get the protons, and you get the hydrogen atom, and the clouds of hydrogen. And those are all different layers of sophistication. The clouds of hydrogen then become a galaxy. The galaxy's information rules are such that it will create stars. The star's information rules are such that it will create this stardust. And then stardust creates everything else, including us. It's all digital processing. Absolutely, totally amazing. When I realized that, I thought, oh, hell, I've been an atheist all my life, and I've been totally wrong. But anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Sorry for making that answer longer than it had to be.
No, that was
not at all.
That was great. I want to get back to something you said. Maybe get into some of the details for some listeners that may not be familiar with some of the basic terms that you use, that like information and information processing and digital computing and things like that. Maybe I'll give my understanding, like the picture that forms in my head for how to describe some of these basic things, and then you can tell me what you think and if I'm totally wrong. Because you made a couple points. One about the importance of discrete states in, for instance, the atom, and also in the subatomic particles like quarks and electrons, and about the kind of the different characteristics that these subatomic particles have. You mentioned things like mass or spin or charge or whatever. So there's a point in the book where you describe kind of a chaotic basic state in the universe, where just like energy, chaotic energy, where there's nothing stable, nothing repeating. It's just a chaos. And then, so in order to have a stable universe, a cosmos, we need something that is repeatable and stable. And so this is where information comes into play, because in a chaotic universe, there is no information. And in order to have
there's information, but it's not repeatable. I mean,
right.
Okay. If there were chaotic information, there would be information about what's there. But the question is, can you build something progressively more complex? And you cannot do that. Well, go ahead. But you can't do that unless you have discrete digital steps. They will not be repeatable. But go ahead.
Right. So within this chaotic information, to build something stable like that, something more complex, you need characteristics. And the way I've come to understand information from reading guys like Bill Dembski is that one way of describing information is to say that it is well, he calls it, I think, a reduction of uncertainty. What that means basically to me is that out of all these possibilities, you have to reduce it to saying it is this and not all of those other things. So, for instance, with electrical charge, it's either going to be this or that, positive or negative, or in an interaction between positive or negative where the charges cancel each other out, it's going to be zero. So you have positive, like +1, -1, 0. Those are the only three options you have. So like you mentioned, it can't be a continuous thing. You can't have an infinite number of possible charges between those values, because then there would be because that raises exponentially, like infinitely exponentially, the possible number of combinations that you have, and it'll be very difficult to get anything stable and repeatable, because you need.
It'd be impossible to get anything stable.
Right.
Just absolutely impossible. You have to have discrete states.
Right.
That's why you look at the beauty of quantum fields and atoms, and they're designed to have these discrete states, and that is the only design possible in the universe that could give you repeatable things. And you need repeatable atoms, you need repeatable molecules to create anything larger.
Mm-hmm. And so that's what we see. We see at the smallest level what seem to be a very limited number of discrete states for these small subatomic particles, and then they combine, and you get, let's say, an atom, and now you have an additional number of discrete states in like the orbital shells of the electrons, and that leads to like an exponentially larger number of possibilities of atoms. And then those atoms, in their interactions, they have certain rules, like information-based rules. So if I interact with this, or like if that has this feature, I will interact in this way. If it doesn't have these features, I will not interact in this way. Right?
Let me interrupt. Right. Yeah, that's right. But they have a very simple rule. The outer shell has, depending on the size of the atom, may have 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 electrons in it. But they can only exist at a very specific discrete state, which means that when light or radiant energy hits them, they can only accept a very discrete package to jump from one state to another. So the whole interaction of radiant energy and atoms is all discretized. It's all digital processing. I apologize, I'm getting off the theme here, but
no, that's fine.
My point is that the rules are elegantly simple, just beautifully simple, and even when you form molecules, two atoms share an electron, basically, which we don't quite understand how they do it, but they do it. And that's a discrete thing. So that can only happen between very specific atoms that need that specific discrete value shared. Mm-hmm. I mean, you get down to a very simple set of rules that build atoms from quantum fields and molecules from atoms, and then they build everything else. Mm-hmm. And they're all based on this digital processing that's going on between the quarks, the quarks and the electrons and radiant energy. I mean, it is a digital processing system that builds everything in this universe. And it is just beautifully simple, beautifully elegant, unbelievably precise. And it was discovered within my lifetime. Mm. You know, Murray John Mann discovered quarks, I think, in 49 or 50. I mean, I'm 76 years old. This all happened within my lifetime. I mean, our knowledge base in 1900 was a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what it is today. But worldviews like scientific materialism and atheism are based on that knowledge base from 1900. Mm-hmm. Nobody has digested, some people have died, nobody has digested this knowledge base that has happened in the last 70 years, and the beauty and complexity of that, and how it totally shatters the accidental universe worldview. Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, you have.
Yes, and on that very point, one of the main arguments that are given by those with the accidental universe worldview is that there are these multiple universes, and that of all the multiple universes, you argue, they say that it just happens to be this one where all the accidents aligned and came into the proper order to somehow miraculously form us and reality as we know it. And it's a very flimsy argument when you look at it.
That was one of the main reasons I wrote the first book, because I thought that was absolutely the craziest thing I ever heard of. But let me tell you, the multi-universe folks, and there are lots of them. That is their last hope right now. the bright atheists realize that what science has discovered, probability does not support an external universe in this world. So think what they have to do. They are desperate people. They say, well, okay, it doesn't make any difference what we discover, how complex it is, how beautiful it is, how pointed it is, how focused it is, how much it doesn't make any difference, because everything happens somewhere else. And it's a desperate stand by people who realize that their whole worldview up until now has just been shattered. So they say, well, God, we must have infinite number of universes, infinite copies of you out doing everything possible. Not anybody believe that. I'm not saying there couldn't be other big bangs or whatever. Mm-hmm. But why in the world would they be? Would they have different laws, different this, different that? And why? Oh, by the way, why would they be there? Why is the universe designed to have multiple big bangs? It all gets back to a intelligent design. And the multiverse is the desperate grasp of the atheist to try to justify his atheism.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Pure and simple.
One of the remarkable things about, the universe, that I think you describe it really well in the book over a progression of these chapters, because the bulk of the book is these 16 chapters on these 16 miracles or miracles or mysterious emergences of this information processing, either information processors or digital rules. And as you go
Harrison,
through,
Harrison, let me interrupt for a second.
Yeah,
when I wrote the book, I was debating whether to make it 16 layers of information processing or 16 layers of mysteries and miracles. It's really, the 16 layers are really the progression of more and more sophisticated information processing all the way up to a network of conscious minds from this network of quarks. Yep. All the layers in there. But in fact, I still am torn whether I did the right thing, because mysteries and miracles that do not really resonate with a lot of the scientific community.
Yeah.
But that's the way I wrote it.
Yeah, and there comes a point where there comes a point where you can't really tailor things to an audience that won't believe it either way, right? So there are people that no matter which one you chose, they wouldn't read it. It's like if there's a reception to the information, then I think it's their own fault if they'll balk at the use of the word miracle or mystery. Yeah, no problem. But that's all right. But the progression that I wanted to talk about is, which you alluded to in one of your last answers, is that because this is the universe is this nested system of information processors and processing, one built on top of the other and made possible by the ones below it, you get this. Well, each one is dependent on the other. So throughout the chapters of the book, you often say, okay, well, if we take things up to this point, then there's nothing, if we just look at this point in the development of this information processing system, there's nothing inherent in the system itself to imply that it should go any further. So we can get to galaxies, and it's like, well, and we can just leave it at galaxies. Why do stars need to even form? It seems like when you have the whole picture in mind, you get an idea of the purpose-driven nature of the cosmos, that each one is predicated on the other, and each one seems to, in some mysterious way, imply the other, but not based on. Well, it's an implication that you can't see just by looking at the lower layer. You can only see it once you have the higher layers. Let me try to rephrase that in a different way, in case I'm not being clear enough. So I
think you're being very clear. That's
okay.
Good.
Okay. So when you see,
go ahead, rephrase it if you want to.
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing. So if you see a human, the human with all of its powers and possibilities is only possible because of looking down at the structure of the brain, the structure of cells, the all of the systems in the body, like a circulatory system, the spinal, muscular, etc. All the organ systems, all of those need to be there. Those are made possible by the DNA and the cells, which are irreducible. There's nothing in physics or chemistry to necessarily imply the emergence of cells and DNA, but they make use of the rules of chemistry, and the rules of chemistry allow for the emergence or the possibility of cells. And same thing going down. So you go all the way down, and then you find I'm just basically repeating what you said earlier in a different way. When you get down to the very bottom of quarks and electrons, those very basic rules, somehow those rules allow for all of the things above. And to think that that's just an accident, that those rules were that there's just a happy accident, that those few specific information rules in those tiny clouds of energy somehow allow for all of these levels to just accidentally accumulate on top of each other and build and incorporate the rules of each level underneath them, is just, it's one of the when you see it in those terms, for me at least, it's unbelievable that people can believe that is accident, that there's no actual purpose in the universe, and that purpose isn't everywhere in each of those levels, one built on top of the other.
That's right. That's right. You could study chemistry forever and never ever get the idea that a cell is possible.
Mm-hmm.
We still don't know what life is, and we don't know what consciousness is. We don't know what energy is, by the way.
Yeah.
There are lots of miracles and mysteries in this 16 layers. But one thing you said is all the rules at the lower level, certainly all the rules at the lower level support the emergence of all this. But there's actually layers and layers of more and more sophisticated rules on top of that.
Yeah.
These rules emerge. Why do they emerge this way? Why is chemistry able to create eyeballs? I mean, that's an incredible thing, to have just the right elements and molecules there, that you can create this translucent eyeball with the lens and focusing and muscles. I mean, my God.
Yep.
You could never anticipate that.
Mm-hmm.
You could never ever anticipate that. So my thought is that you're getting down back to some things I don't really express in the book, but it isn't just a matter of creating the rules down at this level. Whoever did this created the rules at all the levels. Mm-hmm. Whatever did this, whoever did this.
Yeah.
So along those lines, what you point to ultimately as the highest form of emergence is consciousness, creativity, the superpowers of the mind. All of the various.
You guys have read the book, haven't you?
Yeah, we weren't lying.
Yeah, with some interest, and that these powers of the mind, these abilities are the kind of ultimate fruition of intelligent design. That our ability to even become conscious of and aware of ourselves as the designed. As a product of a designer, is inherent in the design, Ken, which was fascinating to me, and I hope you can say that better and flesh that out a little for us, because I think it's one of the most interesting points you make in your book.
Okay, well, you said it very well, but taking a system engineering perspective, say you were going to design a universe. Well, you could design one that has galaxies and stars and suns and gorgeous planets. You could design one that even has life with plants on them, with gorgeous plants on them. You could design one that had animals frolicking around, beautiful. If somebody doesn't look at that and understand it and consciously appreciate it, if somebody isn't actually able to interact with that in a free will manner, not a robotic manner. I mean, I love my dog, but there's things about my dog that are very robotic. We go on the same walk every day, feed her the same food every day, and she loves me. And if that was all the universe was, it would be meaningless. It would be pointless. But once you give it free will and imagination and learning and curiosity and emotions, all of a sudden you've got meaning. Now stop and try to think, if you didn't have free will and you were robotically controlled by some instincts, and you didn't have emotions and you couldn't care about anything, would the universe have any meaning at all? Would there be any purpose? The answer is, why? Might as well not be here. Nobody would care. Nobody would know. Nobody, and so forth. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think free will and emotions are the absolute apex of what could possibly make this thing meaningful and purposeful. And to get there, you got to have some pretty sophisticated senses, a remarkable memory, a unbelievable learning capability, and you got to have an imagination. We can go through, and I'm a computer scientist. I built systems that have sensors. I built all kinds of radar sensors, laser sensors, you name it, infrared sensors. It's incredibly hard to do. And we then try to interpret the imagery coming from that, and try, in my line of work, it was try to find the tank, try to find the ship, try to find the countermeasure, all that nasty stuff. But anyway, that is incredibly hard to do. We've spent thousands and thousands of people for the last 30 years doing it. And we are still in preschool compared to what your eyeball and your brain can do. You wake up and look out, and you know everything that's in your field of vision. You know what it is, you know its history, we know what's meaning to you, and you know if something's out of place immediately. Try to teach a computer to do that. That's absolutely impossible. My point being, that you got these very sophisticated sensors. You got a memory you can remember your whole lifetime from. It not only remembers, but automatically classifies, well, I'm going to remember this, or I'm not going to remember that, I'm going to put this priority on this, you don't do that. It does it somehow automatically. And from that, you learn. Now, we can actually understand from computers how senses kind of work. We're building cameras, and we don't understand how the brain turns that into a living color picture that we understand. We understand how memories work because we build memories in computers. We understand digitally how memories can work. Your memory works because something changes the structural design of neurons. The neurons actually encode your memory, just like we encode memories in digital things. We understand how learning works because neural nets, we can teach neural nets to learn. I mean, we are in the infancy of doing that, but structural changes in the neural net cause you to learn, and there's no question about that. Imagination, free will, curiosity, emotions, we have no idea. And it's worse than that, of course, because we have no idea what consciousness is. We have no idea why we can see in living color and surround sound this world. What does the brain do to do that? To say that's sophisticated is absurd. It's way beyond sophisticated. I mean, I was at the forefront of applying stuff to computers and putting in the noses of missiles and most exotic stuff we could ever done. We were in preschool. We couldn't even comprehend at all how in the world the brain takes the information coming in and converts it to this colorful thing we see. It gets even more interesting because I always lose my wife about right here. There is no color out there. It's just wavelengths. It's just digital information coming in wavelengths. There is no red and blue. There is no sweet and sour. There is no pain. The only place any of that stuff exists is it takes the information in. There's real information out there, but it takes the information and it paints this picture for you to perceive. And that by itself is pretty damn amazing. Mm-hmm. To say that is the top of this image processing chain? Well, hell yes, it's the top of the image processing chain. Nothing else comes close to it. Nothing comes close to it. You start with quarks. There's about 2 or 3 quarks down there talking to each other, and you end up with people up here discussing things like this. Mm-hmm. And it's something in the book I want to say for whatever audience we have here is that you look at the brain, and people don't realize how complex it is. There are 100 billion neurons in there, and they're all digital components. They either turn on or off based upon the input they get and where they're at in the brain or the nervous system. So you got these digital logic circuits that can turn on and off about 200 times a second, and that's doing all this digital processing at the neuron level. If you went in the brain, think about this: the neurons are made are cells. They're made of molecules. They're made of atoms that are made of quantum fields. If you took the quantum fields, the electrons and the quarks, and expanded them to the size of a marble, about half an inch in diameter, then an atom would be about, I don't know, it's like depending on the atom, would be hundreds of miles in diameter. Now think about that. You got these little tiny marbles in there that somehow create the forces that this atom obeys. It creates the information rules this atom obeys, and it's 100 miles in diameter with these tiny little marbles of energy in it. And of course, they're not really marbles, they're really pervasive fields, but we don't understand how it happens. And then you take the atoms and make a cell, like a neuron will be tens of thousands of miles long, if electrons were the size of marbles. And it would have thousands of inputs and perhaps hundreds of outputs. And they're all netted together in this 100 billion neurons that create your brain. And then the size of your brain, and people just absolutely don't believe this until they go through the math, would be 15 million times larger than our solar system out to Pluto. So inside 15 million, so that's what you got, all these 1,000-mile long neurons and these little tiny marbles, quantum fields, and it's all they're constantly doing digital processing. The quantum fields can make a quantum decision at about 10 to the 30th times a second. And we don't really know exactly, but it's about that. Which means that's a trillion, basically, times a second. So you got all these little marbles in there making these decisions that fast. And then the atoms are making decisions. Again, the atoms, we don't know how fast they can make decisions either, but that's what runs our computers. We think we can get it up to into 10 to the 20th or 10 to the 25th or something, which is a trillion. And then the neurons are making, there's all that's going on constantly with all these little marbles, and this 15 million times bigger than our solar system brain of yours. And the result of that is you get these neurons that are making decisions 200 times a second. And the result of that is you can sit down there and watch a football game and drink a beer. I mean, isn't that amazing?
Quite.
Anyway,
no, that's really that was a conception I was trying to grasp for myself when I was reading your book, and I appreciate you fleshing that out more, because it really gives gravity to the idea that there are these very, very tiny digital elements or machines inside of a vast scope of greater information processing that does have some informational input into this much larger context.
Yes, well, it's based on it. I mean, it all builds in layers. It's layers all the way from quantum fields to you and I sitting here talking. It's layers and layers of complexity of digital processing. And that realization was what and then you go to the math. I'm basically a mathematician. Go to the math of the probability of that happening by accident. It's totally. It's absurdly impossible. It's not just impossible. It's absurdly impossible. Mm-hmm. And we haven't talked about DNA yet. I don't know if you want to go there or not. But
yeah, sure. Yeah, let's get into DNA.
Okay. Probably everybody knows we discovered DNA in the 50s. You know, again, well within my lifetime. I was at least 10 years old by then or whatever. So it means all this is happening very, very recently. People aren't digesting the impact this should have on worldview. But we discovered DNA in the 50s, and this, you all know it's a digital memory. It encodes the information in 4-bit. Well, it's got 4 ladder steps, so it's 4-bit arithmetic. And it has 3.2 billion ladder steps, so it has 6.4. That's 6.4 binary instruction. Binary. If you converted the base 4 to base 2, it's 6.4 binary instructions, which is how we use our thinking computer terms. 6.4 billion binary instructions. That's just a number. If you took that and tried to publish it in a book and put 50 ones and zeros per line, 30 lines per page, 200 pages per book, it's 20,000 volumes. So a single little dot inside that single little nucleus has equivalent of 20,000 volumes of digital information. Now, we are learning, and the learning is going rapidly, but it's painful, because up until the 90s, even 2000s, they had discovered how DNA encoded proteins, and then so you actually have 20 amino acids, and you have an address for each amino acid, and you've got a small portion of the DNA actually encodes the sequence of amino acids you have to put together to build any specific protein. And there are 20,000 proteins in the body. So when scientists first discovered this back in the 80s and 90s, they actually said that these little protein coding sections were genes, and everything else was junk DNA. Well, the protein coding section is less than 2% of the DNA information. But for 10 and 20 years, and still some biologists still call the rest of DNA junk DNA. They call genes just a little tiny part that code for the 20,000 proteins in your body. From an information system standpoint of view, that's ridiculous. It's naive, it's absurd. It takes a hell of a lot more information to build your body and your mind and your capabilities than a string of proteins. In fact, it's been proven that is like 1.5% of the DNA. There must be a hell of a lot more information in that DNA. That was obvious to me 25 years ago, and that was one of the reasons I wrote the book. I was so upset that the biologists were still calling the rest of the DNA junk DNA. I didn't change their mind, obviously, with over here ranting in their corner, but recently they have changed their mind, because they have discovered in the course of all these genome experiments and all the research that's going into this area now. There's a tremendous amount of research in this area now. They've discovered that the RNA reads at least 80%, if not 90% of the DNA, which means it reads it and uses it in your body. which means 90% of those 20,000 volumes, which is some, whatever, 18,000 volumes, is actually a digital program that defines your body, your shape, your capabilities. And somehow the cell reads that and builds you. You emerge from all that. There's still tremendous confusion in biologists, and I know a lot. I talk to a lot, and they don't. Most of them don't agree with me. I say the information for your design has to be in the DNA. And they say, oh, there's junk DNA. There's information from outside the DNA. There's information from outside the cell. I don't think so. When you're conceived, there's one cell. Where's that rest of the information at? All the information that's going to create you is in that cell. Anyway, wandering far afield here. But anyway, so recently they've discovered that the RNA reads at least 18,000 volumes, 85 to 90% of that DNA. And they're finally admitting that, which is a huge admission for the biology community, because it comes back to what an information system person might think. There has to be that much information inside that DNA. Now, the other remarkable thing about DNA right now is that it's a remarkably sophisticated program. We are just starting to understand a little bit about DNA. And I really say a little bit. I mean, people think it's giant steps. We are way in preschool understanding DNA. But the remarkable thing is how sophisticated the program is. It's obvious that characteristics like your eye color, the shape of the head, the fact that I got this big bald head and so forth, isn't one gene. The different parts of the DNA code have to cooperate to create characteristics in your body. We've proven this by different diseases. You have to have several different genes screwed up and so forth and so on. So you've got, it's not just a linear code like a programmer like me or somebody else would write. It's a code that somehow cooperates and interfaces with itself and talks to itself. And that's not the really sophisticated part of it. The really sophisticated part of it is that, you have, I forget how many different kinds of cells in your body. I'm going to misquote a number here, but so I might be making a mistake. I was thinking it was like 3,000, but maybe more. But each cell is different. And each cell, a skin cell, a muscle cell, a neuron, an eyeball cell, and each cell reads a different portion of the DNA. So before I say that, I got to back up a second. The DNA is just a memory. That's all it is. It's just a memory. It's not a computer. You've got to have something that reads the DNA and acts upon those instructions. That's what computer systems, that's how we design computers, our digital processing can do. We have a memory, we have something that reads the DNA and acts upon it. That's what a digital processing system does. So what reads the DNA? Well, the RNA molecule reads it, and then it travels around the body. So the computer system is actually implemented in the cell itself. The structures inside the cell that build proteins and do the defensive things and do the waste and control and do the nutrient thing, all read the DNA and act. So the cell itself becomes the digital computer, the hardware that reads the software that's stored in the DNA. So the whole cell is a digital computing system. Now, the really amazing thing is this DNA, you've got these 18,000 volumes of instructions. Every cell reads a skin cell reads a different portion of the muscle cell, different skin cells read different portions. So they adaptively read different portions. So not only are these little cells computers, you effectively have 3,000 different computer systems. The different cells, a different computer. It's reading a different part of the DNA. And it gets worse because every cell, say a skin cell, has chemicals inside of it, hormones and nutrients and waste and whatever else. And so the state of that computer is time varying. So you have the DNA being read by these, if I say 3,000, that might not be the right number, but 3,000 time varying computers. And so now you've got, so whoever wrote this code didn't do the simple thing like we would do and write the code for one computer. The code works in 3,000 different time varying computers. And it created those computers. The code created skin cells. It created neurons. The code was so sophisticated, so smart, so intelligent that it could take that first germ cell in the egg and create all these different computers and then program each one differently. Now, if you're a computer scientist and think you're going to go do that, forget it. This is like playing n-dimensional chess, and n is a number we don't know how big it is. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. Mm-hmm. And people, and so, but I've still got biologists who will argue with me that, by God, there's junk DNA, and oh, by God, it's all an accident, and oh, just survival of the fittest did it all. Impossible, absolutely impossible.
Mm-hmm.
You take all the cells that ever existed on the face of the earth, and said, let them flip their DNA and make a positive change in their DNA once a minute. You can actually do this. You can calculate the biomass that existed for 3 billion years and give it a healthy margin, so you get more. You're being very generous. And the total number of probable trials is like 10 to the 60th. That's a huge, huge number.
Mm-hmm.
The number of trials to create one protein is like 10 to the 240th. It would be impossible to create one protein, not alone create your body, your mind, everything else. And oh, by the way, create 3,000 different cells that read this thing. I mean, the claim that this is an accident is so mathematically absurd that these people ought to be ashamed of themselves. They aren't ashamed of themselves. They say, oh, well, I've got a multiverse somewhere.
Yeah.
And in multiverse, everything happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I should throw that out the window. But anyway, the multiverse, but that's a desperate place for them to hide.
Mm-hmm.
And when they hide there, you can't, the one thing you've got to recognize is they are throwing everything we learned about science. Science has learned all this in the last 70 years. They are throwing all of that under the bus and saying, oh, it doesn't matter. So they claim science supports them, and they're actually throwing out everything because science doesn't support them.
Mm-hmm.
And saying, oh my goodness, it doesn't matter because there's infinite copies of you out there. We're having this conversation in 50,000 different languages and 50,000 different universes, or infinite number of universes. Absurd, absolutely absurd. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's my thoughts on DNA.
I'm not a programmer, but I want to ask if this analogy might be somewhat accurate based on what you were saying. So we have all of these different cell types, like thousands of different cell types, and the information for basically differentiating and specifying each of those cell types is in one, DNA, is in the one DNA code. It's all shared in that one DNA code. Would it be accurate to say maybe that it would be like having a hard drive with a single code that has the instructions for like 3,000 different operating systems that run some programs that are the same between them, but also have programs that are unique for each of those different operating systems? Is that?
It's exactly similar to that.
Okay.
It's exactly similar to that. In fact, let me just give you one more analogy. We build autopilots for missiles, and the missiles sense, how far, what their velocity is, where they're going, They sense about 10, 15 different things. And depending on what they're sensing, they'll switch to a different autopilot routine, which is equivalent to what you're saying. So, but the DNA does that. But the amazing thing about DNA is, again, you only had that initial one egg cell, which that DNA just gets replicated. You got the same DNA that you had in your mother's womb, in that one cell. So that one cell had to not only program that hard drive, it had to create these 3,000 different systems. I mean, that just blows your mind when you stop to think about it. I mean, boredom blows your mind. How in the world? Mm-hmm. But it's not just that. I mean, it's not just that, by God, I'm amazed. You can apply mathematics and probability to it, and it is impossible that this was an accident.
Mm-hmm. Well, just like it would be impossible for the computer that I described with that hard drive to just pop out of existence, accidentally, right? And
Absolutely.
that computer that a human might design doesn't even approach the level of complexity that's in a single cell.
That's right.
So
That's right. That's exactly
it's totally crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get back to one thing you briefly mentioned that you discuss in the book in various sections, and that is radiant energy. You talk about photons and how they are carriers of information. And maybe you could you describe that, what you mean by that? Because it applies from like the very bottom, from these subatomic and atomic processes all the way up to our own vision. So could you just tell us about light?
Yeah, I can tell you what I know about light. Actually, we've been focused on the quantum fields and the atoms and the molecules. That's only part of the thing. They are in a sea of radiant energy. We are in a sea of radiant energy right now. And radiant energy goes all the way from high frequency of sound, all the way up through light and X-rays and infrared, and it's all radiant energy, radar systems and so forth. It's all radiant energy bombarding you right now. And of course, we all know this. We can encode information and send it into televisions and radios and radar systems. Your eyes take the radiant energy, the information coming from radiant energy as color and give you the perception of the world. So, but the thing that you got to understand is it isn't just molecules, atoms, and quarks. You are awash in the sea of radiant energy. It is constantly. And what does radiant energy do? It provides energy and information to molecules and atoms and quarks. So you've got this complete system where you got these entities out there receiving and processing information, and they are awash in a sea that is providing them constantly with energy and information. And energy is primarily in the form of heat. Without heat, things stop. Mm-hmm. But information comes. Well, color is information, radar information. It's across. And the amazing thing is, the bandwidth goes over hundreds of gigahertz, if not thousands of gigahertz. And as an engineer, we can come in and slice out any piece of that bandwidth, like we do with radar systems and infrared systems, and process the information in a very tiny piece of that bandwidth. And it's just a couple cycles wide and something that's tens of billions of cycles long. And there's information in the whole damn thing. It's kind of amazing. Did that answer your question?
Well, that was that kind of approached it. But there's so much more to it, right? At one point, let me see if I've... at one point in the book, you call light something like a super efficient way of putting information into minds. And I assume that can happen in various ways. First of all, just through vision, right? Because... but I want to start at the bottom, though, because when you have subatomic particles and atoms, and they receive a photon, as you describe in the book, that photon has to have, and we alluded to it briefly at the beginning of the conversation, that photon has to have like a particular frequency, like its characteristics have to be exactly matched to what that atom or particle expects, or how it's programmed to respond to a very discrete set of information characteristics. So it has to be finely tuned in order to, so that photon gets shot at this atom, and then based on the profile of that photon, it will do A, B, or C, or it'll absorb or split or merge whatever with another atom or whatever, and that similar process of information transfer. So you have a source of information, you have the medium through which it's transmitted, and you have the reception of that information. Then you have the processing of that information, where it's actually transformed into something, which then transforms the information processor itself to change its own state. That process is universal throughout creation. So that's what happens with our vision. So all the way up to vision now, we have light, we have photons, we have photons and light reflecting off of surfaces and shooting highly specific varieties of information and energy into our eyeballs that then gets translated into neural signals that then somehow miraculously and mysteriously get transformed into, like you said, color. And so just visually, there's a whole sea of information that we receive just in any split second that our eyes are open. But it applies on all levels. So we have light hitting our skin, and it's doing things to our biology, and light's hitting plants, and they're engaging in photosynthesis. And if you just look up in the sky, so what kind of expands my horizons is looking up into the night sky and realizing that there's all of this information from the entire visible slice of the universe that's impinging on our world on the Earth at any given time, and it's just this infinite sea of information that is all being somehow received by everything. It's an interactive system where every part is influenced by all these other parts. That and each part in itself is a highly specified information processing unit that, based on its own rules of construction, will respond to some slices of that information and ignore others, and take some as important and valuable and transmutable, and others to ignore. And it just that vision of light, like so many other parts of the book, just make like before we were talking, or before we were recording, Alon was mentioning how in the book you can read your passion in the book, and your own wonder and awe at the universe, and just that vision of light for me that you describe in the book kind of gave me a little bit about that, just to think that all of these photons are packets of energy and information, and at the bottom of it, that's kind of what everything is, but it's so much more than that at the same time.
No, that's exactly right. It's a complete system, and it's a beautiful system. We've been talking about quarks and atoms and molecules, but you got to wrap the radiant energy around it. Radiant energy is what makes it work. Mm-hmm. That's what, without that, if you didn't have radiant energy and heat and information coming into these atoms, we don't know what they would do. If they went to absolute zero, we don't know what they'd do. Mm-hmm. The radiant energy is the fuel, both in terms of the energy to do it and the information, so that they can progress up this chain of things. There is one other thing I'd like to talk about. I'd like to talk about, what impact this has on worldviews. Yeah. And values and so forth, because this is where I really cratered. When I realized this, I said, "Oh hell, I'm not only wrong about science, I've been wrong about my worldview, I've been wrong about my values." Which is, it's kind of eye-opening for somebody who thought he was really bright when he was 45 years old. But anyway, the big question in life is, why are we here? What's going on here? Well, I opened the book with that passage about Katie, my 3-year-old granddaughter, who thought she was living in a storybook. And we said, "No, you're not." And she looked at me and said, "Well, what is all this stuff?" I thought that was kind of remarkable insight for a 3-year-old. What is all this stuff? We don't know what all this stuff is. Anyway, let's see, where was I going? I got off on Katie and I forgot where I was going. Hang on for a second.
So the worldviews and changing your values.
I got to reboot. but philosophy and science are the basic questions is, why are we here? What should we be doing? And how should we treat each other? Those are the three basic questions. And science can't answer any of them. Science can answer the design of what's going on. They can't answer the why. We do not understand energy. We don't understand why is energy here, and why does it take this form of these three little quarks and radiant energy? We do not understand. The book I wrote, Mysteries and Miracles, we don't understand any of those transitional layers. You made the point earlier. You would not anticipate the transition to the next layer of any of the layers. We do not understand why they transition. We just do experiments and say, "Oh, they do transition," and we think we understand it. We don't understand why they transition. We don't understand why galaxies were designed to build stars, or why stars were designed to give stars. We don't understand why. We have done this reductionist scientific method going backwards and said, "Oh, that's how it happens. That's how it happens. That's how it happens." But each step, there's no clue as to why it jumps to the next step. And when you look at the next step, it's clear the next step's anticipated everything that came before it, to your point. The next step absolutely needed everything below it. The brain absolutely needs these quarks in here, these little marbles doing the thing they're doing. So anyway, so my point is that science is a magnificent tool. I love science. I'm not anti-scientific. This book should be attuned to what science has accomplished in its last 70 years. But science can't tell us why. And science can't tell us how we're going to treat each other. And science can't tell us what to do. For that, you need values. And somehow we have been built with inherent values, our emotions and our free will. And there are people who dispute this. but there's one section of the book that goes through this, where you look at the religious philosophers, the natural philosophers, I'm losing the terms, but the philosophers who are materialists and so forth and so on. And all of them come back to the fact that there is a basic set of fundamental rules the way humans should interact. And it all comes back to love and compassion and trying to do the best you can and using this brain, these superpowers we've been blessed with, to actually learn and achieve and progress. You know, I look at my career, and we went from not having computers basically to computers on a chip. You know, you're carrying a supercomputer in your pocket now. It's been a remarkable 50 years. And humanity did that. You know, the progress we made in the last 50 years, you know, we've been around for 100 million years, supposedly. And the progress in the last 50 is absolutely amazing. And it was all because of these superpowers we've been blessed with, that we can actually understand this stuff and actually put systems together to do this. It's not like it was an accident that happened. I mean, why does math describe so much? Why can I do so much with mathematics? Why can I understand so much of what we just talked about with mathematics? And that's where it all came from. So, and why, given that, can I then go build these systems? And why when we wanted to build a better radar, but we could go find a material for the antenna, we could find a material for this, we could find a material for that, we could find materials for faster computers, we could find algorithms. All the pieces were laying there. It was like a challenge put in front of us. It was like, this is your challenge. We put you here with this capability. This is a challenge. You go use this challenge to progress as fast as you can. Mm-hmm. And why would you do that? The sense of achievement in doing something like that is fantastic. The challenge, it's exciting. It's just wonderful. So I come back to the simple-minded belief, I guess, that, you know, what good would it be to create a conscious creature if you didn't create an environment that could challenge him? If you didn't create a playground he could play on. So not only did God create these whoever that is, by the way, and I'm not picking on any one guy, but the intelligent designer, let's call him God, created this thing we've been talking about that just blows your mind. But he got us here, and we have the remarkable capability of communicating with each other so that I don't have to go back and learn everything from the basics. I can go take a PhD course and learn just about everything humanity knows. So we become one big learning mass of networked minds. We have a continuous capability to learn and progress and talk to each other and utilize all these tools, all this playground that he built into the system to challenge us to go be the best that we can be, and to progress as far as we can, and to build these societies, build these computers, and build Zoom, for God's sakes. You know? Mm-hmm. And we've done it, and we're doing it faster and faster, and God only knows where it's going to go. I can't imagine. You know, I was a pretty smart guy, but I didn't realize. You know, a friend of mine stopped to open a computer shop. That's the dumbest thing in the world. People don't need computers. It's back in the 50s. So, I mean, you can't anticipate where we're going. Mm-hmm. Anyway, but my point is that the whole thing has been structured like a huge playground, a huge adventure land for us with new rides, and we go ride that ride and we get smarter, and we're able to think about the next ride and build the next ride and ride that ride, and we keep on doing that. And this analogy I like, because it's an analogy that, by God, it was built for us. It's so obvious that it was built for us. It's more obvious to a system engineer who's lived through the last 50 years than probably anybody else, because we have built things that are unbelievable. This thing we're talking about is a direct result of all the work we did on miniaturized electronics for missile space. Anyway, but my point is, you get down to values, and there's all sorts of values. The atheists in our society, we have a cultural war right now. We have a cultural war between people are going to be irritated with me, but the left and the right, where I classify the left as the atheist left and the right as the spiritual right. Now, there are different classifications, and there are some spiritual people over here, and there are some atheists over here. I understand that. These are broad generalities. We have a cultural war going on right now. And the people over on the left are atheists, so they believe that it's a meaningless, purposeless reality. So we're victims. They paint this as victims. And unfortunately, this is the state religion. This is the state religion we teach in our schools. That you are a victim of absurd, meaningless, accidental reality. And because of that, everything is relative. There's no such thing as truth. Well, I'm a system engineer who just built a whole generation worth of systems, and I'll tell you, there is truth. If it wasn't truth, you couldn't do that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so over here, they're telling you there's no truth. Everything's relative. Your truth is in what you think is true. Don't let anybody judge you. This sounds absurd, but I've got grandkids and they're in college. It's impossible. You can't judge these teenagers. They said that you believe that, Grandpa? Well, you're old. You're going to die off. We're going to take your place. Us relativists, we're going to take your place. I'm afraid they might. That was one of the reasons I wrote the book. But that was the reason I wrote the book. So anyway, so you got this cultural war going on, and you got these people who basically have no values. And the values they have are the values that they make up, but they can make up any damn value they want. They can decide that rioting, looting is good. They can decide that murder is good. They can decide whatever they want is good. They have no morals. They have no grounding. They have no sense of values. But you go back and read philosophy, and I've read a lot, and both spiritual philosophy and secular philosophy. And they all come back to, by God, something very close to the Christian ethic, that love and compassion and striving and setting goals and working hard, that's why we're here. And creating families is why we're here. The nuclear family, Black Lives Matter, bless my heart, I love all lives matter, but the Black Lives Matter organization, as part of their charter, wants to destroy the nuclear family. Can you imagine that? The entire Western culture has been built on a nuclear family. It takes crazy young teenagers who don't have a thought in their head, makes them parents, and all of a sudden, my God, their whole life changes. And they will make every sacrifice in life to make sure that child has a good life and has every chance in life. That is the fundamental unit of a society, just like a cell is a fundamental unit of life. If you don't have that nuclear family where people have values and want to protect that child, want to protect their community, want to protect their family, want to protect their nation, want to protect the world from these crazy relativists who have no values. So my point is, I didn't create that. That was somehow built into the system. This nonsense that there are 47 different genders, There's a man and a woman and a family and children. And that's the basic unit of a society, just like a cell is a basic unit of life. And in that, there are values. So God didn't only intelligently design everything we've been talking about. He intelligently designed all of this, who we are, what we should be doing, what we should value, how we should treat each other. And those values are slipping away in this crazy society that we have right now that's dominated by these basically atheistic, socialist, leftist intellectual group who've been around for hundreds of years. And finally, they're getting a voice here for I don't know what reason. I mean, you can read this stuff 300 years ago. They had the same thoughts back then. They've tried it in 5 or 6 different societies. They've all been an absolute total disaster. This will be a disaster too.
Yeah. Well, so everything you just said, Ken, was one of my last questions for you, and you fleshed that out really well. And it's really incredible to think how an understanding of intelligent design or not feeds into these different worldviews and feeds into the nihilism and relativism and existentialism of a entire portion of the population that is untethered, that is unrooted in values, that has no sense of wonder for why we're here and how we came to be and what the universe is and what may exist that may be higher than us. And on that note, I was wondering if outside of the scope of your book, you might comment on any speculations you have, any thoughts you might harbor on the idea that that there is a kind of a spiritual hierarchy or level of intelligences that are responsible for the insertion of information at these incredibly sophisticated levels that we're just now realizing the implications of. If you have anything to say on that.
Yeah, I do, and this is so personal for everybody that it's easy to cross somebody's line here. But I do believe that this whole thing's been intelligently designed, which means there's an intelligence that designed it. It could possibly have happened by accident. I believe that back to the point I was making earlier with Harrison, is that it's not just the rules at the quark level. The rules at the higher levels were inserted. I believe that there's some form of evolution happened, but it was guided. It could not have happened by accident. So I believe that there was active involvement in the structuring of these rules and active guidance by an intelligence. I think it had to be that way. I don't think some intelligence created the rules at the quark level and turned it on and then went away. You get up to DNA, that doesn't work. Because when you get to DNA, there are things happening that the fact that the quark rules were written one way couldn't happen unless they were guided. But it gets beyond that. Do I have a personal God? I would like to say I do. But you got to appreciate, I was 35 years an atheist. So I've been on both sides of this fence and really strongly on both sides of this fence.
Mm-hmm.
So, my wife has a personal God. She prays, she has experiences, she really feels it. I believe in a God that has created this and guides it and it has obviously a compassionate heart, because I think it's absolutely beautiful. I think that I can't imagine a more beautiful life than you can live if you try to. People are living some pretty miserable lives. Witness what's going on in Seattle right now or whatever. So, but I believe that the Christian ethics are absolutely inspired. I mean, I couldn't, and back to the little chapter on philosophy, I think everybody who's gone off and tried to define how to interact with people comes back to a version of the Christian ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Do I believe in the book, I talk about religions having a story and having a set of values. Every religion has a different story, and to try to convince their believers why they should be, that particular religion. And there are only 15,000 religions in the history of mankind. And the story tells them why they should behave a certain way. Well, if you take the story part of all the religions, just go look at the rule, at the rule part of religions, they are 99% the same. How to treat your family, how to treat your neighbor, how to treat everybody with compassion and love. But basically every religion has some form of the 10 Commandments in it. So I don't think that's an accident. I think God designed us that way. I think designed reality that way. Does he influence us? This gets highly speculative and non-scientific, but yeah, I think he does. I look at America and I think, how did this country happen? You look around the world today, and there's, more than half the world lives under dictatorships, and probably half of them are brutal dictatorships, where people have no free will. They have no freedom. They just can only do what the government tells them. How did this little shining light on the hill happen? And it's, again, I'm getting far afield from your God question, but I guess the answer is yes. I believe that God exists. I believe God created this thing. I believe he interacts with it. I believe it's possible for a person to have a communication with God, but I don't necessarily believe in all the stories of all the religions. I believe that a lot of that is manufactured by man. I do believe in the rules and the morality that they express.
I think that was really well put, Ken. And to tie that in, maybe right before we close, because I think we'll stop talking in just a few minutes. But to tie that into your previous answer about worldviews and the lack of values in certain worldviews, in the accidental universe worldview, just as in any information rule set, there are certain things that work and certain things that don't work, right? Certain things that are possible and certain things that are impossible.
Absolutely right.
And when you get up to the level of complexity of a human society, there will be a similar dynamic at play where certain things work, certain things don't work. So the way you describe morality in the book is as a multi-generational experiment in morality building or testing reality. So a worldview is and a moral system is a way of testing reality. And the world will very quickly demonstrate to you whether your worldview works or not. Because you'll come up against a brick wall if it doesn't work. And I think that's what history tells us. That's what we can see when we study history. We can see, first of all, which worldviews survived and how well they survived and how well they thrived, and we can see these universal values throughout history that have hung on because they work. And then we can see the trends of philosophy and worldviews that make a really concerted effort to butt up their heads against the brick wall, and that's when we see the communist revolutions in the 20th century and revolutions even before then, before communism per se, before Marxism, where there is a confrontation with reality that results in a destruction of information. In very literal ways, you have the destruction of actual information in the forms of knowledge, of books, of learning, of intelligent people, of people who provide their societies with values and information. You have the destruction of property, which is an informed matter, basically, that we have formed into a particular shape, a meaningful shape. You have the destruction of monuments and statues throughout all of these revolutions over history, and then the destruction of life and societies themselves. And if anything, I think that is the sign that that these varieties of worldviews, which have a lot in common with each other over the years, are deficient worldviews. They don't jive with reality. That they don't jive with the information rules, the moral rules, which is a type of information rules, as you say in the book. There is something about them that doesn't work, and it doesn't work in obvious ways that the people who adopt these philosophies and worldviews don't seem to care about or realize when they either read history or ignore it.
No, I totally agree with you. That there's an exception you can't ignore, and we've kind of ignored it. That is the fact that evil does exist.
Yes.
And when you get something like a Hitler or a Stalin or a Mao or any dictator, the system has been tilted toward the evil side, and that's what it's. You get almost these psychopaths running the world.
Yeah.
And that's a real possibility. I mean, China's got 2 billion people, and they're run by a dictator. And if you watched that thing on TV last night, that blind dissident talking about his torture under the Chinese regime, they have no respect for human rights or freedom. The things we've been talking about today are the optimistic side of human nature, and I believe it's the system's designed that way. And I believe, that America is a beacon of hope that we can progress down that path. It'd be very easy for evil and power to win. Yeah, and of course it's won in the past. In most places it's won throughout history. It's been the dominator people who control society, the powerful. This is one of the very few places where that isn't true. It has not been true, and we're actually a very small percentage of the world's population. The reason I wrote this book was to try to make young people think about choosing between their worldviews, between a spiritual worldview and this relativistic, accidental universe, atheistic worldview. I think we're at a critical point in our culture. I think we're at a critical point in the world. I think we could very easily slip. We could slip in this election into the socialist side of reality. And if we slip into that, then what happens? It's very scary. So I agree with everything you're saying, in that we've been portraying this positive, by God, everything's getting better and better and better. If evil and power went out, things will get worse and worse and worse. Mm-hmm. Happy note to end on.
No, that's yeah. Well, if anything, it's an inspiration to kind of take a look at our worldview and see if it might need some revising. So if that's the case, then for our viewers and listeners, I recommend checking out Ken's book. You can get it on Amazon. Do you have any website that you'd like to recommend, or just head to Amazon to get the book?
Just head to Amazon or Archway Press. I think Archway Press and Amazon both sell the book. So
okay.
No, I haven't done a website. In fact, I'm a little bit limited there. I need to figure out how to do more social media type of advertising the book.
All right. Well, so that was, once again, Modern Science Proves Intelligent Design, the Information System Worldview by Ken Pedersen. Thanks, Ken. It was a blast talking with you.
A real pleasure.
You guys. I had a good time. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I was very impressed by your insights into this whole area. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And have a good day, and we'll be in touch.